Man, look at this. Look at this. Actively black. Says it right here on the sleeve, too. Actively black. Man, what are you mad about now? I'm familiar with Actively Black. It's a black-owned sports brand, activewear, started by Lanny Smith. Yeah, but this shit don't piss you off? Why would it piss me off? What if we had Actively Whyte gear? We've had it. Man, what? Look, never mind. What's the point of your little tirade here? My point is I'm so sick and tired of black. This is Black History Month. Why don't we have a White History Month? I agree with you. Wait, what? I agree. Let's have a White History Month. In fact, let's start right now. Okay. We'll call it the overview. Alright. Okay, in order to talk about white history, we need to go back to where the white race began, 1676. You see, prior to this, white had been used as a descriptor of people, but never had been an official race. But after we colonized America and stole land from the indigenous people, the Europeans here had a problem. The poor people kept having rebellions against the rich people. So what they decided was to create the white race. This was a way to convince people that you were part of something bigger than yourself and that the rich people weren't your enemy, but those other people were. Now, who was allowed to be white? That changed over the years. You see, for the next century and a half, chattel slavery was based primarily around race, and it started from the transatlantic slave trade. And throughout the 17th and 18th century, even into the 19th century, certain people that came over that we identify as white now were not identified as white then. For example, the Italians or the Irish initially were not considered white, but because white is a completely made-up race, they later decided Italian and Irish people are white. This idea is called white supremacy, where we create this mythology of a race that's superior than other races. Like, hey, poor white man, you might not be rich, but at least you're not an enslaved black man. In 1860, the idea of abolishing slavery was becoming more popular, and white people didn't like that. Abraham Lincoln, who was an abolitionist himself, became president, and the southern states here in America seceded from the Union. You've heard the story. It's called the Civil War. Now, after the Civil War ended in 1865, white people didn't just give up their white supremacy. No, they then began a series of things called Jim Crow laws. These laws were intended to target black people. Black people were found to be criminals for anything, and they held public lynchings during the Jim Crow period. That continued until 1954, when the Supreme Court ruled in Brown versus Board of Education desegregated schooling. Of course, white people were not happy about that. There's lots of videos and photographs of it. And then in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed, which was supposed to provide equality across the races. Of course, white people were pissed about that. Now wait a goddamn minute. You're only talking about the bad things that white people did. What about the good things? Now slow down there, Cletus. I haven't talked about all the bad things yet. This is just the overview. We haven't even got to gentrification, redlining, legacy admissions, the war on drugs, the FBI infiltration of black liberation movements. The white race has a very long history of oppressing and marginalizing black and brown people. This is just the overview. Like all the inventions and things that we did. You're right, white people have invented things, but do you know how many inventions white people stole from black people? Pop quiz, who's the king of rock and roll? Elvis Presley, baby! He stole his entire style, music and dance, from black musicians who were not allowed to play publicly, and so he was the white face on their black music, their black style, and he's the one you remember. Same thing happened with invention. Yeah, when you brought up the Civil War, white people fought to free black people in the Civil War. Wrong. This is a talking point that was started by the United Daughters of the Confederacy in the early 20th century, that white people fought to free black people in the Civil War. But the problem is you cannot simultaneously be the cure and the disease. You've heard of Harriet Tubman? Yeah, of course I have. Why do you think Harriet Tubman led the Underground Railroad and not a white person? Because black people were continuously and always fighting for their own freedom and to get out of their own oppression. And along the way, some white people might have helped, but black liberation has always been led by black people. And the North didn't fight to free the slaves. The South seceded from the North and then attacked the North. The North just fought back. That was just self-defense. So basically what you're saying is I should just be ashamed to be white because we ain't never done anything and we ain't worth a shit. What you're feeling is a natural reaction to your entire worldview being challenged. White fragility and white rage is very well documented, but I don't want to get into that in just the overview. The main thing I want you to take away from today's class is that white race was created for white supremacy, for colonization. Its entire purpose was to make this fake majority so they could rule over an entire other class of people and exploit them for their labor. So if that's how the white race began, and that's how the white race has continued to be used for the last 200 plus years, then I'm not telling you there's no good thing that white people haven't done. That's just you trying to avoid the accountability of what our ancestors truly did, because actual white history isn't taught in school. But thanks to what you and I have started today, maybe we can get the truth out there. Oh hell no, goddammit, I wasn't meaning this shit. I want no part of this. What's wrong, Cletus?
So white people don't even exist. And you know how I know that? Because white people don't even call themselves white. They just know that you are black. And so they just act white because you are black. So while you live with your blackness, they aren't living with the whiteness. They love the privileges that whiteness brings, the privileges, the institutional access, and everything, but they don't love being called white. And if you don't look very closely, you would miss this. They call themselves Americans. They call themselves Europeans. They call themselves Republicans, they call themselves businessmen, they call themselves Democrats, but they don't call themselves white. And they tell you you are African American. All the time we hear about African American, African American, African, Caribbean. But talking about the in the context of the United States of America, if they are calling you an African American, why don't they call themselves European Americans? Because they don't also belong to that continent originally, to that country specifically. Originally, if they call you Black Americans, then why is it that it's kind of a little uncomfortable to call themselves white Americans? You know, they just want to call themselves Americans because they have a strong sense of privilege, entitlement, a certain weird entitlement where they just feel like they really belong. But we all know that they don't belong to the country, to that country of the so-called the United States of America, or even any other country in the Americas or the Caribbeans, or even those that forcefully still live in a continent of Africa. They do not belong here. But it is a war to try and even spark that debate of telling them that kindly and politely, please, in South Africa, this land needs to go back to the original owners of this place because it needs to be made more productive for the sake of many people.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with being white. So why do so many white people hate it when someone addresses their whiteness? White Americans especially cling to the ideas of equality and individuality. That here in the great old US of A, the land of opportunity, anybody can achieve anything if they just put their mind to it. And it's easier to hang on to these ideals by saying things like, I don't see color. Because if they admit that they can see people's differences, then they would have to admit that being white is an advantage. Especially here in America, where there are countless laws and organizations solely dedicated to the oppression of black and brown people. Nobody wants to admit that they benefit from white supremacy. It's incredibly uncomfortable. I mean, trust me, I know, look at my skin color. But white supremacy can't be dismantled until we acknowledge that it exists. And that can be incredibly difficult because as soon as someone gets called white, they get defensive. Instead of listening to the message, they attack the messenger. They ignore facts, they purposely misinterpret what they've been told, they try to just flat out insult the person who's talking to them, just so they can feel better about themselves. Because when you call them white, they feel as though you are ignoring their individualism. You're trying to deny their heritage or invalidate their experiences. Deep down, they know that the concept of race and whiteness are social constructs. And if a white person admits that they benefit from how the world perceives them and not actually for who or what they are, then they admit that they're complicit and comfortable with racism. If you're white and you've made it this far, instead of saying, I didn't have privilege because I was poor or uneducated or my grandparents were immigrants or whatever struggles or hardships you may have had, try asking yourself, how did I benefit from my whiteness despite having those disadvantages? Really think about what your life could have been like if you had that same disadvantage, but you weren't white.
So you live with your blackness every day. It is your sense of identity. It is your pride. It is your sense of community. And I want you to know that You are not black because white people say you're black. You are not who you are because white people say you are. You have existed here long enough, far long enough, even before they attempted to exist. So, I mean, your blackness is beauty. Your blackness is beautiful. And I mean, you owe it to yourself to tell yourself that every day, to take in that pride. I mean, to to come together as black people with the unity of purpose, with the love for one another, with the strength, and call out those that are coming in our midst, trying to sell and sow that seed of division, because it is through that seed of division that they get a chance to rule us, because they have used this tactic for centuries successfully, that they know that whenever they divide us, whenever they sell that narrative of that somehow we're different in this way or the other, then they get a space from which the white supremacy and imperialism can germinate. It gets a good condition for it to grow. So, beautiful blackness. It is your time. It is your time to, to recognize the beauty of your blackness, the excellence in your blackness, to know that you existed and you are not who you are because white people say. No, you are who you are even before the existence of these people. Massive respect to white people who recognize the truth that the black people pre-existed the white people, and we are the superior race genetically and biologically. Scientifically, the black race is far more superior than the white race, if at all there is anything like white, because I tell you, white people don't even exist. There is only that whiteness because you exist as a strong black individual. Thank you for your time. That is what I had for you in this video. I want you to love yourself, to appreciate yourself, to love that hair, to love that nose, to love that face, to love that smile, to love your brother, to know who your brother is, and let's stick together. One love. Peace out.